Yesterday, we discussed that if you shechted a korban Pesach not on Erev Pesach, and you shechted it sheloi lishma, not l'shem Pesach, but rather l'shem shlomim, it would be a kosher korban. So Rav Papa asked Rava, what would happen if you shechted a Pesach not on Erev Pesach, l'shem Pesach, but not l'shem dereit bailim? Do we say that since it's not a proper lishma, it would be a good korban because it's not on Erev Pesach, or not? Rava paskins that it would be a pasul korban. It would be just as if he shechted this korban Pesach on the Erev Pesach without any bailim. The Mishnah then discusses the psul of if you shecht a korban Pesach l'shem people who cannot eat the korban Pesach, and the Mishnah lists off several of them. Either shaloi l'oichlin, like a choyle or a zokein that's not able to eat a kazayis, or shaloi l'mnuyav, people who are not registered for this korban, or arelim and tameim, because it says v'chal oral lo yochal bay, an oral may not eat from the korban Pesach, and the tamei may not eat from the korban Pesach. If you shechted exclusively for these people, the korban Pesach will be tamei. However, if you shechted for a group that included one of these people, in fact, the korban would be kosher. Then the Gemara says, then the Mishnah continues that if you shechted the korban Pesach before Chatzos, it's pasul because it must be shechted bein arbaim. And even though we learned that the korban Pesach must be shechted after the korban tamid, if it was shechted before the korban tamid, you should hold on to its blood until after you spritz the blood of the tamid. But even if you spritz the blood of the Pesach before the tamid, it will still be kosher. The Gemara wants to know, where do we know that if you shechted a korban Pesach for people who can't eat it, where do we know that that is pasul? So the Gemara brings a pasuk, b'michsas nefashos ish lefi achloi tachoisu alaseh. B'michsas nefashos tells you that you have to be registered to the korban, and we know it's b'di'evid because the Torah repeats it, tachoisu alaseh, and that double lashon indicates by kachim that it's pasul even b'di'evid. And being that the pasuk is lefi achloi, it teaches us that if someone cannot eat the korban Pesach, it's just as pasul as if someone who wasn't registered on the korban Pesach. Then the Gemara brings a machlokes. What happens if you shechted the korban Pesach l'shem kosher people? However, while you were shechting, you had in mind that the zrika will be done exclusively for arelim. Would that pasul the korban? Rabbah said it would not pasul it, and Reb Chisda said it would pasul it. And their machlokes was based on how they understood a brisa. The brisa tells us that if you shecht a korban Pesach, and there's one oral or some arelim amongst the people included in the korban, the brisa says that it would not be pasul, and the brisa brings down a pasuk of bizois. Both Rabbah and Reb Chisda agree the way to understand the brisa is the real makar for the fact that if there's some arelim, the korban will still be kosher, is because it says v'chol oral lo yochal boy. V'chol means if it's completely a group of arelim, then the korban is not kosher. However, if there's only some arelim in the registered group for this korban, in the menuyin, then it will be kosher. Now, the Torah then says bezois as a meat. So they both Rabbah and Reb Chisda learn, that this tells us that this halacha that we learned by the shchita l'shem a group that has one oral inside it or several orelim inside it, this only applies to shchita, not to zrika. And Rabbah holds it's telling us that zrika is less stringent. And by zrika, even if you had in mind to make a zrika for a group of exclusive arelim, it would still be mutter. It would be a kosher korban, because zrika is less chomer than achila, because zrika is less chomer than shchita, because you find only a psul of oichlin related to the shchita. Reb Chisda, on the other hand, says the bezois tells us that zrika is more chomer, and that by zrika, even if there's one oral in the bunch, it would still pasul the korban, because he learns zrika is more chomer than shchita, because when it comes to pigel, no pigel will be finalized with an isur pigel until the zrika is completed properly. Rab Ashi disagrees with both Rabba and Rab Chisda. Because Rab Ashi says when it says v'chol oral, that doesn't mean that they all have to be arelim in order for it to be possible. It means if there's any arelim involved in this group, that will automatically passel the shchita. If you shecht l'shem a group that has any arelim, that's what the base shot of the pasuk of v'chol oral is. And Bezois will teach us that no, only if they're all arelim is the carbon passel. But if there's only some arelim, but there are some kosher in the group, then it would not be possible. And we don't have Bezois to tell us that Zrika is any different. And therefore, Abashi would argue that both for Zrika and both for Shchita would have the same halacha, that if they're all arelim, it will be possible. But if only some of them are arelim, it will be kosher.